Okay. Okay, well, hello again, and so this is another response video to the Coursera Introduction to Philosophy series, and this is week 2 now. Subject of this week's material was what is knowledge, and it was sort of the classical definition of knowledge and the fairly recent counterexamples. And by fairly recent, I mean within literally the past 50 years it is now. So those counterexamples are becoming a bit longer in the tooth, but they still hold weight. So just to briefly summarize, if you haven't watched the video, the classical account of knowledge, I believe, comes from Plato. It wasn't mentioned in the video, but I think it was through Plato, one of Plato's dialogues, and they basically came to the conclusion that knowledge is true, justified true belief, all in one go. It's these 3 points. So in order to be knowledge, of course, it seems that it has to be true. If you we don't really say that you have knowledge if what you have in your mind isn't true, if you just make up something. So, or else, you could just make up whatever and it could be called knowledge. And that's not really what we call knowledge. So it must be true. That's a pretty reasonable condition, I think. Another critical point is you must believe it. So as it was put in the video, you must have a stake in the knowledge. So you sort of have the attachment to it. You in order to have the knowledge, you have to believe it. If what is in your head happens to be true, but you don't personally believe it, then that's another example where that's kind of awkward. That we don't really call that knowledge. It's like, well, 1 + 1 is 2, but I don't believe that. You wouldn't really call that a type of knowledge, and that's kind of a more, I don't know. I guess I agree with that, but yeah, just because it's awkward to say otherwise. It seems weird to say I have knowledge of something that I don't believe in personally. Um, with some caveats that I could have knowledge of imaginary things, which leads down another rabbit hole. Maybe that's a question for discussion. So, say leprechauns. This might actually be from the forum. I think I peeked into the forum. This might be influencing my my response right now. Leprechaun knowledge of leprechauns, for instance, or imaginary beings. I could say I don't personally believe in these things, but I have knowledge about these things that don't actually exist. Can you have knowledge about things that don't exist? And sort of folklore and things like that. Those are other questions. In any case, maybe that's a divergent topic, but it's interesting, but it's divergent. And so those are the 2 points. There's 2 so far. Knowledge must be true, and you must believe in it. And the third one is you must be justified in your belief of it. So this is somewhat crucial because you can't just sort of happen across it and then suddenly have knowledge. There has to be sort of a reasonable process that you arrived at that conclusion. So this eliminates the possibility of guesses. For instance, maybe there's a 50-50 chance of something happening, and maybe you don't know. So it's an event that's already happened in the past, and there's a 50-50 chance of it happening. A good example of that might be like a presidential election. And say that you weren't paying attention to the news and you're totally out of it, and you don't know whether this would be U.S. presidential election, that you don't know whether candidate A or whether candidate B won, the Republican or the Democrat, the classical case. But there's a 50-50, well, let's say for the sake of argument, there's a 50-50 chance. Sometimes it comes close to that, it seems like, but for the sake of argument, 50-50 chance, and they don't know yet. You could say that they just made a guess based on no justification. They didn't watch the news. They didn't know who was the stronger candidate in the debates. They don't know generally what the polls showed. Any of that. They have no knowledge of that, and they just randomly guessed, and they happen to be right. That would not be considered knowledge because it's sort of like something that came across by we would call it like a bad justification or no justification. The means at which they arrived at that knowledge was terrible, something none of us would accept. So it seems crucial. It seems reasonable that knowledge must be something that is justified. That you've come to this knowledge by a reasonable process. And so there we have it. There we have the classical definition. A knowledge is a justified true belief, and that's something that if that justified true belief isn't maybe familiar with you yet, the more you study philosophy, I think that you'll remember that. I haven't been in philosophy courses for years. As I mentioned in my previous video, I have a philosophy major, for whatever that counts for. I don't regret it, no regrets. But justified true belief is one of those things that gets pounded in your head, and that it's somewhat harder to forget it than to remember it. So try as I must, I can't forget this. Justified true belief, justified true belief. And yet, maybe midway through the video or so, that they come up with, or the presenter comes up with these classic counterexamples, first proposed by Gettier, as it pronounced in the video. There's always just problems pronouncing philosophers' names, but that doesn't matter so much, as the counterexamples themselves are quite important, because they sort of knock holes into this classical theory. One counterexample mentioned in the video was the clock. So there's a funny joke that's a broken clock is right. It's correct 2 times of the day, because if you look at, even if you happen to look at it during those times, you're going to be right, but just by chance. But you don't actually know necessarily that it's broken, but you have just by chance come to the knowledge that, oh, it's like 7:30 in the morning, and the justification, it seems reasonable, because okay, this is a reliable clock, it's always worked up until now. And another justification was, okay, I always wake up this time anyway. My body just sort of happens to know when it's 7:30. I just sort of wake up and I look at the clock, and oh, it's 7:30 on the clock too. So this is a counterexample, because that justification is a bad justification. But there is justification. It's just it doesn't quite work out. It doesn't. We wouldn't say you've come to the knowledge that it's actually 7:30, because of that device. It's not functional, and I'm not sure. I have a hard time with, well, I don't know. So just intuitively, so say you look at say the person themselves, they don't know that they're looking at a broken clock, but maybe an observer, looking through the one-way mirror or whatever, is observing, and they're observing this person trying to obtain this knowledge. Would that person say that they're getting the knowledge that it's 7:30 from that broken clock? I guess the argument is that you can't get the right time from a broken clock, even though it's correct 2 times of the day. That's just it's limited to the joke. We wouldn't say you can actually get knowledge from a device that's broken. I guess that's the intuition here, that there's something that was working previously, now it's broken, and now you can't get any more knowledge from like a broken thing. And if you happen to get any knowledge that's correct, you've come across that by chance. And that sort of goes back to the other example that I made of the person guessing, okay, who won the presidential election? And it was sort of tantamount to a guess, and we would call that bad justification. And this is a Gettier style case, because they've come to, well, and this is troublesome. They've and now I'm starting to doubt myself. Let me see. Maybe I should have thought more about this before I made this video. So, I was going so well there for a while. In any case, this is. Let me pass over this. Maybe we'll say that there's a problem. There's a problem because it's it's justified true belief, and yet we wouldn't call it knowledge. So I'll stop there. The clock is a style case for that. And as mentioned in the video, there were, I guess there have been many attempts to fix it or to patch up this classical theory of knowledge, but then none of them have quite satisfactory. Um, they haven't quite been satisfactory. So we're kind of still stuck with these counterexamples. Another counterexample was, okay, a farmer sort of looks over a field and sees like a sheep in the field, but it's not a sheep what he sees. It's like a really, really fat dog or something that resembles a sheep. And so he's come to the conclusion, oh, there's a sheep in the field. And in fact, there is a sheep in the field, but it's not what he's actually looking at. What he's looking at is that big fat dog. But what he doesn't know is that just behind that big fat dog, out of view, is an actual sheep. So it's true. he's come to truth somehow, but through like a bad way, and he doesn't know it. So this is a counterexample because it seems to be justified, because he looks and sees with his eyes, which haven't failed him before or whatever, and it seems reasonable. Okay, I'm just looking over my field. I should be able to see some of my sheep. It seems justified, but I don't know. So he's come to a conclusion that's true, and yet somehow it's not knowledge because he's come through it by the wrong means. So it's another of these weird problems where the means by which we come to the knowledge, this seems to be like the crux of it, is this justification. And maybe it goes back to the justification point, that maybe he doesn't have justification. But the argument is that he does have justification. So maybe like a real naive counterexample to the Gettier style, or Gettier style counterexample would be, well, his justification was bad, so it wasn't actually justified. But I know better. I know that the philosophers have been arguing over this for too long, probably, then, and that naive sort of counter example isn't going to really hold weight unless I think about it more, and I'm sure there's a bunch of holes in that, so leave that for further thought and discussion. Yeah, and we sort of come to the end of the video kind of in a dissatisfied way, saying like, oh, I guess we don't really know what knowledge is after all. And so maybe this crucial question, do we have knowledge, seems to be a crucial question. Do we have knowledge? Maybe we can't answer this, because it seems like to answer that question we need to know what we're talking about. In order to know what we're talking about, we need to answer the question, what is knowledge? And we haven't really done that. So that's kind of where we're left with it, where we're left in the video, and as I assume where analytic philosophy is left today. Which brings me to my last thought, my last point, which I was pondering. Maybe the most important one was sort of like, I'm kind of questioning the whole point of this. It seemed, I mean, that's a reasonable, it's a reasonable criticism, I think. Surely we have important questions. We have the questions from the last video, which were, what is the meaning of life? That's a really important question. One we can't really answer until we answer a whole bunch of other questions, which haven't really been answered or agreed upon. So no one agrees on what is the meaning of life. It's a very lofty question, but it's important nonetheless. What is knowledge? It seems like it's an important question, but maybe from a more practical standpoint, I question, what would we do once we come to an agreed upon definition of knowledge? We can say, oh, we have knowledge. Can we point to things and say, oh, you have knowledge or you don't have knowledge? Is that the purpose of it? And I was sort of comparing comparing this to science. There was a really big debate, a really interesting discussion on the forums, coming from the last video. Someone claiming, I think they were just sort of like the gadfly, but it was welcomed by everyone, I'm sure. But they were claiming, well, science has sort of superseded a lot of what philosophy used to do. So it seems like science has replaced philosophy. And I was coming at the same question from a scientific point of view, what is knowledge? What can science practically do with a question like that? And what can it do after it's answered a question like that? So I'm coming at this from the perspective of what is practical in the field. So once you've gotten past this hurdle, what do you do now? And a lot of times, science doesn't. I mean, science tends to sort of like temporarily answer a question, tentatively. That's a big keyword. It's tentatively answered what is truth, what is true about this subject or something, and it sort of runs with it for sometimes a long, long, long time, until we find, oh, damn, well, we got to revise all of what we thought we knew because this brilliant thinker has come around and turned everything on its head. And the brilliant, oft quoted, oft mentioned book that sort of brings all this to light is, I believe it's Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Quite a famous book. That itself is getting quite old now too, but it's still quite relevant. It puts everything in perspective and sort of says, in a way, it sort of says, well, science tentatively says this is true, and a lot of the research that goes on with these big ways of looking at the world, all these smaller investigations happen under that umbrella, and when that these smaller investigations themselves might be overturned and superseded along the way and redefined. So everything is constantly being redefined and refined and discovered, and new ways of looking at things all the time. And there's this huge umbrella that all this research happens under, and this huge umbrella sometimes gets overturned. The classic case is like the Copernicus shifting of our conception of where the middle of the universe is, or in Copernicus' case, it's the sun at the middle of our galaxy. It's this scale. And another time it happened was Galileo, I believe, with the moons orbiting other planets. No, not Galileo. In terms of astronomy, I guess it would be like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo sort of progression. Or in terms of physics, it would be more like Aristotelian physics progressing to Newtonian physics, which sort of redefined a lot of those things. And then along comes Einstein with the relativity. I'm no expert, so I'm talking in huge generalities, and none of this is meant to be taken as absolute truth. It's funny we're talking about knowledge, but I'm just illustrating the point that this book is talking about these huge revolutions that happen and all the research that sort of goes on under this umbrella of truth, in quotes. And it's sort of like, I guess it's very postmodern in its sort of interpretation of what is knowledge, what is truth, because it's something that's changing all the time, but in a way that's really unsatisfactory. It seems like, like, I think I have knowledge, but in a way it's true that like maybe tomorrow I'll find that I don't really have knowledge. So I don't know. Practically, it seems like I like the approach that science takes. Science says, well, we think we're justified, we think this is true, and we believe it, so we're going to run with it until proven otherwise. It's sort of the law version of, guilty, or no, not guilty, innocent until proven guilty. And that's what science does, and runs with it in a spectacular way, and it's very productive, of course. And I compare that sort of approach, that practical approach of taking something, thinking that, okay, I'm reasonably justified, I think, but I might be wrong, but that's okay. I'm going to run with it, and I'm going to do all this crazy stuff, and other people are going to follow me and do all this and make all these advances, hopefully, and that's okay if it gets overturned later on. That's just the nature of how science works. But with philosophy, it's like it never gets off the ground here. It's like, what is knowledge? Well, damn. Oh, what is knowledge? Well, it's not, damn. And it's like, oh, we have to start from the ground level every time. It's like science, What I was thinking about before was like off a diving board, which is a stupid analogy, but it's like science says something like, okay, here I'm on the diving board. Look, there's the water below. I gotta dive. Okay, I gotta do this the best I can. You know, I practiced. Okay, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna jump off. And then science jumps off the diving board, and it carries through with it. There's no sort of like existentialist, like, oh, you know, what is this thing I'm on? You know, what is this? Is this really water in front of me? You know, if I dive, am I gonna die? You know, there's none. They just sort of like they think, okay, you know, well, it's time now. And then philosophy is still stuck up here. So philosophy is like, well, I don't think it's a good idea to jump until we define like what exactly it is I'm standing on, and you know, why am I doing this in the first place? And you know, I don't know. Water might actually be unsafe, you know, and they're sort of like stuck up on the diving board. And I just wish that philosophy, for once, recently, you know, would actually jump off and take a chance. But it's like it's too afraid these days, and I feel like that's a part of what's holding back a lot of modern philosophy, and what's advancing a lot of science, because science is taking something and running with it and saying it's okay, you know, like we think to the best of our knowledge that this is the truth, this is that we have knowledge, and we're gonna go with it, and we're gonna make all this huge progress. Maybe philosophy is just sort of the maybe it's the really the old man, because philosophy has a long storied history of sort of like taking something, running with it, and then getting shot down. Taking something, running with it, getting shot down. It has a huge history of that. All these thinkers who do jump off the diving board, right? And they go into crazy lengths to defend these crazy systems. You know, Hegel, Spinoza, these great system builders, and everything works within their system that they define. And it's in a similar way to science. All these thinkers sort of spin off under them, under this umbrella of what they agree upon to be the truth, the system, and they make all these advances in their field in a very similar way that science did. But then it turns out that in the end that, oh well, you know, like, okay, these ideas sort of fall out of fashion, and part of it maybe has to do with the idea is it's not a lot of it is practical. It's a lot of just sort of like armchair philosophy, people writing, and there's no real practical application to it. Whereas science, there's a lot more. I think there's a longer life for these big umbrella theories, because we actually take it, run with it, and a lot of progress happens underneath it, and a lot of real practical applications happen under the banner of what is the present definition of truth, until it gets overturned. And the really interesting thing is in the structure of scientific revolutions, there were parts of it, I don't remember specifically. It was something about, it was something way back in the day. It was, I think, these chemists that were coming to conclusions from the wrong justifications, very similar to the Gettier style counterexamples, but they were coming to these practical. They made these observations, and they happened to be correct in what they assumed, but their justification was wrong because of a later umbrella theory, because what they were operating under got overturned, and then they said, well, it's not true because of this. You're right, but it's not true because of this. It's true because of this. It's good that they still could carry out that practical solution. That, okay, maybe their whole worldview is screwed up, but they still actually got something done. It was something useful came out of it, and I feel like maybe we could do the same in philosophy. I don't know. Even if we have to revise everything now and then, it feels like I want to get off the ground. I want philosophy to jump off the diving board again. But philosophy is like, at this point, I think in history, philosophy is just like an old man who just wants to be left alone, and sort of like, oh, too hesitant to go outside because it's dangerous out there. And a lot of me feels disappointment at that. And starting with this first video, what is knowledge? It brings out these points, and so it's getting me thinking again. But not all hope is lost, I think. There's a lot, I think, I don't know, there's hope for philosophy still. I think I'll leave it at that. But no, this is good. The second week's videos got me thinking, so I appreciate it. But okay, so hopefully maybe I'll make another video next week. So keep thinking. All right, thanks for watching. Goodbye.